Some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We begin today with a look at a new policy that could stop the deportation of as many as 1.3 million undocumented immigrants who were brought to the United States as children. People can start to apply for the new status starting next Wednesday, August 15th. President Obama first announced the so-called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program back in June.
Young people who study in our schools, they play in our neighborhoods, they're friends with our kids, they pledge allegiance to our flag. They are Americans in their heart, in their minds, in every single way but one, on paper. Now, let's be clear, this is not amnesty, this is not immunity. This is not a path to citizenship. It's not a permanent fix. This is a temporary stopgap measure.
Under the new policy, students aged 30 or younger who are enrolled in school on the day they apply will now be eligible for a 2-year reprieve from deportation if they demonstrate that they came to the U.S. before their 16th birthday, lived here for the past 5 years, and have not been convicted of certain crimes and do not pose a national security threat. On Tuesday, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Director met with advocates to answer questions about who will be eligible and how they can apply. Meanwhile, advocates say many people who qualify for the new policy are still being deported. Last week, Democracy Now! Spoke with a 26-year-old undocumented immigrant named Viridiana Martinez, who infiltrated the Broward Transitional Center in Florida and found dozens of immigrants who she said should be released. She was speaking from inside the detention center.
I have found several eligible girls here. One was being held here for 3 months. She was just recently, last Thursday, released, I believe. And there was another one who was also released last week. But the damage is already done. You know, although they are released, the damage is already done because they have been, they have been detained in this place. And I think that's what needs to be highlighted. And, the president and the administration is saying that they are not detaining or deporting 3 months eligible youth, and here I am.
On Friday, Viridiana and her fellow activist Marco Saavedra were released from detention only to be arrested again over the weekend during a protest calling for the release of other low-priority detainees inside the Broward Deportation or Detention Center. Well, Marco Saavedra joins us now here in New York City. He just returned to the city where he grew up after immigrating to the United States with his family when he was 3 years old in 1993. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Marco.
Thank you.
Talk about your experience inside, why you chose to get deported to get inside Broward.
Correct. So once again, my name is Marco, and I'm a DREAM Act eligible student. So knowing that the privilege and the comfortability that status or that semi-status affords me, we knew that we could somewhat comfortably go into the center, infiltrate it, collect stories, develop campaigns with them, and then once going public with our status and going public, me and Viridiana going public with the fact that we had done so, we knew that we had a way to release, and we basically were asked to leave, if not expelled from the center. So in brief, that's kind of what we did.
And tell us what you found inside. Who did you find?
What we found and what we've developed since we started this campaign, and I was in the center for about 23 days, was many detainees who, as you said, qualify as low priority for deportation, including the case of Claudio Rojas, who is an Argentinian father and is now on his 17th day of his hunger strike because as an expression of his faith, but also as a statement saying that the worst has already happened to me, being separated from my family for the past 6 months, and using his body as a sacrifice, or as an example of the sacrifice that he's already endured. He's willing to do that, and because of that was separated from and was taken from Broward Transitional Center to Chrome Detention Facility in order to be removed from the other detainees that were also beginning to organize as he had begun.
But what was his story? Why is he one of the people who would be released under Obama's program?
Under the prosecutorial discretion memo, correct, as outlined in the summer of 2011, he would be a perfect candidate. He was in removal proceedings about 2 years ago when he was detained with his son after kind of a minor traffic infraction. They were trying to enter a port airport and they didn't have valid identification. And so they were both in detention for 3 months, and his son is DREAM Act eligible, Emiliano Rojas. And so his case was dropped. But Claudio's received 120 days to leave the country and disobeyed it because he'd rather choose to stay with his family and provide for them. And so receiving a deportation order and not obeying it, now that's the biggest thing that is really hurting his campaign for his release. There was a petition that was submitted on his behalf, is that correct? Correct. Already, on the legal side of things, we've already filed about, or his attorney rather has filed already, I believe, 2 stays of removal to reopen his case, because with a deportation order, he doesn't have the right to see a judge in order to maybe re-adjudicate his case. But there's also a online activist petition at dreamactivist.org if folks want to sign on, and that is not only for Claudio but really all the detainees. And we found about 30 live petitions of individual stories with their families of folks that would qualify as low priority, and we're really calling on the revision of all 600 cases because we know that the number is really high due to the fact that this is a low security detention center. So can you say a little about how you actually managed to infiltrate the facility? What did you have to do in order to get in? Correct. So ironically enough, it was rather difficult. I know we first went to the port where Claudio and Emiliano were detained about 2 years ago. And afterwards, we went to the Fort Lauderdale airport and tried to talk to Border Patrol there, kind of with the pretense of looking for a friend or wanting to turn myself in, and kind of being very blatant about being undocumented, being here without papers. And then on the 3rd attempt, we went to a Border Patrol station, again under the pretense of looking for a friend, where I confessed that I was also undocumented, that I had come with my alleged cousin through the border. And so upon that realization, the agent apprehended me, which was, I guess, in a word, the bait in order to enter the center. How many young people did you find at the Broward detention facility who you believe would be eligible under the new Obama laws? Under the new Obama rule for DREAM Act eligible youth specifically, there's 5 that I know of. And I guess the most blatant case is the one of Publicio Machado. I guess the most outstanding thing on his case is that he was deported in February for driving without a license from Boston, and then tried to re-enter through the Bahamas. And upon re-entry, he actually pressed charges on his trafficker for human trafficking, and is also eligible for a visa on those grounds. But what has been when one assists in closing out a case, one as an undocumented immigrant assists the U.S. government in closing out a criminal proceedings case, and he has the paperwork to demonstrate that he and a fellow passenger, Regis, both testified against their human trafficker, against the man that was captaining the boat, trying to enter to the, Florida via the Bahamas. One is then essential in the prosecution of that case and is eligible for I guess several types of visa. I don't know specifically the one for human trafficking. How many people are there in total in the facility? About 600 detainees, and I was, as we were saying, due to the fact that it's a low-security detention center, a lot of them are there with little to none criminal records. A lot of them were caught either driving without a license or as passengers at a checkpoint, or maybe fishing without a license, or at work, or at a corner at Home Depot. Or there were instances of men with going to church, because I was obviously only interacting with the men, and stopped just on street corners, or for minimal infractions, minimal misdemeanors such as DUIs or open containers. And obviously those are the more harder cases, but definitely the ones without any criminal histories are very favorable for discretion. Marco, how sure were you that you wouldn't be deported yourself? And what did they do when they figured out what you were doing in the jail? Correct. So we never filed any paperwork or never had attorney representation when we were in detention. And we've, I guess the history of civil disobedience, particularly to the National Immigrant Youth Alliance, demonstrates that with public actions, due to the publicity and public nature of them, none of the now over 100 participants, not just DREAM Act students, but also parents, have ever been put into removal proceedings. So that's why the process of creating silent actions, kind of going undercover, developed, because publicly we could never access a detention center after being apprehended by the police, kind of like what happened this past weekend. And so without, again, filing any legal claims or talking to our deportation officers, we were asked to leave, I think, as soon as national media started to pick up on that story, with Democracy Now! And Univision interviewing us. And so, again, we were just given a paper that said that we might be eligible for the recent Obama announcements for young immigrants, and asked to leave.
We're going to talk about that announcement in a minute. We're joined by Marco Saavedra, undocumented activist who infiltrated the Broward Transitional Center in Florida July 11th, was released Friday only to be arrested again over the weekend, calling for the release of other immigrants in detention. He came to the U.S. from Mexico with his family when he was 3 years old. We'll be joined by Marco again, as well as an attorney, talking about what the process is now that these Obama rules have been laid out for young immigrants to seek a stay of deportation or not to be go through the process at all. Stay with us.